Well, guys, now that we're done E3 and a lot of announcements have been made, the Xbox One X was obviously the system of the show. That was the new system that everyone got to see, and announcements were made, which included pricing. And now the dust has kind of settled and people are kind of putting their opinions out there based on if it's too expensive or if they should have gone a different route with the system altogether and just made it very expensive with everything jammed in there. It's interesting to look at. And the big question seems to be now, is the Xbox One X too expensive? Now I'm going to give you a couple different opinions. Mine is a little different than, say, the standard mass consumers that will walk into a store and look at it. So I'll give you an idea of both. My opinion is no, it's not too expensive. In fact, I think it is a good value for the money if you take a look at the specs and then what you're getting for your money. So let's first start by taking a look at the specs inside the Xbox One X. So here's a quick little chart we'll take a look at that kind of compares the two. The first thing obviously is the CPU. It is technically a custom CPU, even though it's still really the Jaguar processor alongside what the PS4 Pro uses. The reason they have to keep it mostly the same is because they're requiring these games to work across the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, and the Xbox One X. And since things like AI, for example, is all drawn from the CPU, it has to at least be compatible, so they're sticking with that same CPU. This has also allowed them to open things up on the GPU side and still keep it at, I think, a reasonable price for what's being packed in this little box. Now, the custom part, of course, comes from the ability to do things like DirectX 12 better by essentially baking that entire protocol into a GPU block that functions between the CPU and the GPU. And it does well. Anything DirectX 12, like Forza, for example, works great. That's a 4K at 60 frames per second. True 4K, by the way, not checkerboarded. It's true 4K, 60 frames, and that works well. But it seems like when we start to get away from DirectX 12 and developers aren't really in the mood to design anything specifically for the Xbox One X because there's no real audience yet for it, and there probably won't be a large audience to make sense economically for them to do it, you're going to see checkerboard upscaling. But at least for now, any of the games that seem to be made for it using DirectX 12 work great. They also gave a slight bump in the frequency when compared to the PS4 Pro to 2.3 gigahertz versus the 2.1 gigahertz on the PS4 Pro side. Down from there, of course, we do have the GPU. In a nutshell, without going into things like CUs or anything, 6 teraflops GPU on the Xbox One X side, 4.2 teraflop on the PS4 Pro side. So yes, it is a good deal more powerful. If you want to put that in perspective, the Xbox One X is essentially a full, like, original PS4 more powerful than the PS4 Pro, which is pretty impressive if you take a look at it that way. The size is pretty similar, except the Xbox One X seems to have a size advantage on it, although the weight, it does weigh more, mostly because it seems to be using more, internally, there's going to be heavier cooling, for example. Like, I do know the cooling in there and the power supply are going to be heavier because they're using, what I could tell, more aluminum than they are in the PS4 Pro, which seems to be a lot more plastic, for example. And then, of course, the price being $100 in difference. That, honestly, for some people, without even really caring about the specs, that might be enough for them to buy the Pro over the Xbox One X. But really, we need to take a look at how a customer walking into the store is going to view the Xbox One X. So in my gosh, 10, 15 years of retail experience with video games, I've been around the retail scene for a long time, like a long, way longer than I should have been. At this point. I mean, it's been quite a while. I got my first job at GameStop when I'm like 16, so it's been a bit. But let's talk a little bit here about how your average consumer, when they walk into a store, they're going to see the price difference, and there's a few things you need to understand when it comes to mass consumership. There's a few things. The big thing, the strongest component to a retail setting is something called the impulse buy. It is just key to any retail experience for the retailer. They need to make sure you are comfortable walking in, and maybe you didn't go there for an Xbox, for example, but you get there, you start doing the math, and you realize, I think I can swing this and maybe not eat meat next week or something. I can swing this, and I think I can get away with it. And it's a lot easier to try to factor that in for something that you don't go there thinking you're going to get when it's $250 like an Xbox One S, or in some cases it's on sale for $200 when you get closer to the holiday. Remember that Minecraft bundle that was like $200? That is such an easy thing to sell when somebody walks in randomly, because keep in mind, guys, the Xbox One S is an ultra high-def Blu-ray player. It's a 4K streaming device. It plays Xbox games. You can plug your TV into it and you get a full overlay on it. There's a lot going on there for $200, so it's much easier. And it came with Minecraft, so if you have kids, you're like, well, that'll work for them too. But when they walk in and they see the Xbox One X, $500, it's a lot harder to swallow than, say, $200 or $250. That's usually not an impulse buy. That's why you see so many analysts concerned, because $500 puts it out of the range of an impulse buy. An impulse buy stops being an impulse buy at around $300. That's where it stops being an impulse buy. And it's tough. That's why you see the PS4 Pro sell one out of every 5 PS4s that sell is a PS4 Pro. That is a low number. They would probably want it to be more like 50%, half and half, but because one is like $250 now if you shop around, the other one's $400, there's a pretty big price difference. Now, what's going to happen at Christmas time when the Xbox One S is $200 and the X is $500? That's a $300 price difference. And really, the last thing, for example, about impulse buys, if I go to the store, and I'm going to have to do this beforehand, my debit card, for example, most of them have limits. A lot of them are a $500 limit. I either need to call the bank and tell them I'm going to make a purchase, or I have to go to the ATM, get some money out, and then show up there and pay half and half or all in cash. That stops being an impulse purchase. That's one where you go there, you see it, you realize you need to jump through some hoops to get the money for it, and then you have to come back. And once you leave that store for the first time, or once you start thinking about all these steps you have to go through, maybe you start reconsidering that purchase. And that can be a problem. Now, that's not really the system's fault or anything. I mean, in my area, if I were to buy an Xbox One X, like I'm going to when it comes out, I know now I need to bring extra money because with tax, it's going to be about $530. That puts me $30 over my spend limit on my debit card for one purchase. So I either need to just get cash, because I'm planning this out. Like I said, if somebody walks into the store, sees an X, and if I just saw it, I realized I would have to go out, get money. I'd have to call the bank. If it's on a Sunday, I'm not calling the bank. And then I would have to come back, or I would just have to hit the ATM and then kind of start paying half and half and stuff. And that becomes more of a chore. And that's tough. That's a tough thing to get around. And it's not Microsoft's fault. It's not the Xbox's fault. It's just, it's the way it works with consumers sometimes. The other big thing you have to realize in retail is there's something also called perceived value. When a customer walks in and they're getting what will probably be a small box for the Xbox One X, keep in mind, it's a small system. It's not going to be in a big box or anything that comes with all this cool stuff. It's going to be the system. It's going to be a controller, an HDMI cable, and a power cord. And that's it. And they're going to be shelling down $500. Whereas if they look to their left and they see the Xbox One S, for example, even the PS4, the OG PS4 that is, they realize that for $500, they can buy the system and then a whole slew of games, an extra controller, Xbox Live, currency for the shop if they want to buy something. Your money goes a lot further in what's called perceived value if you buy the system and then like 4 games and then, you know, an Xbox Live card and an extra controller. All of a sudden, you're leaving with a huge bag of stuff, whereas your other $500 would have got you just a system that you're just going to walk out without a bag because it's in just a box. The PS4 Pro kind of has that advantage over the X right now because you can technically buy the Pro for $400 and then you can buy a game and then maybe a currency card or maybe a cheap controller, and it comes out to what the Xbox One X is. Now, the big thing here is Microsoft is not catering to the mass consumership. I would not expect the Xbox One X to sell like well. I just wouldn't. The Xbox One S, however, will sell better when it's next to the Xbox One X for a lot of the reasons I just listed. The Xbox One S looks so much cheaper when you put it next to the Xbox One X, right? When it's going to be there sitting on the shelves and you look over and see the Xbox One X at $500, then you look over here and see the S at $250 or $200, you're just going to go, oh, I'll just buy that instead, and then I'll buy some games. So Microsoft's going to win either way. In fact, the Xbox One S will end up being their big, like, that'll be their horse in the race, because that's going to bring them the most money, because they don't want to sell you a system that is super expensive that they make no money on. They want to sell you a system that maybe they still break even on, but you're going to buy 4 games, 5 games with it instead of put that money into their super expensive system. And then you're going to buy an Xbox Live card, which is complete profit just about for them. That's what they want. I mean, really, in their mind, if you buy either one, they win. In fact, they'd probably rather you buy an Xbox One S, accessories, and games, and an Xbox Live membership, rather than spend the money on the X. So to quickly summarize, I don't personally think it's too expensive. I think it is a great price at $500 for what you get. 4K gaming is not cheap. If anyone thinks they were going to get 4K at 60 frames for $500 on every game, you're crazy. You're insane. It's just not going to happen. The fact that Forza 7 runs at 4K 60 is awesome. That is a great value right there for the money. Now, racing games, of course, are easier to run. When you get into things like Assassin's Creed, like we see, it's harder to run. Crackdown will not run at 60 frames. That's going to be a 30 frames per second game. We don't know anything about upscaling. I assume it's going to be true 4K because that's an in-house kind of game, so they're going to spend more time with it. But it's already been confirmed that will be 30 frames per second. And then we still need to see destructible environments, for example, that will only be in the multiplayer aspect from what I'm hearing. But the real reason analysts are freaking out about this is because they don't think that mass consumership will buy into it. I don't think so either, but they have to remember Microsoft has another system they want you to buy, the Xbox One S. They could care less if you buy the X as long as you're buying the S. They'd rather you buy the S. Buy the S, buy games. Microsoft's happier with that. And that's it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Just a quick look at the Xbox One X. Some of my thoughts on the price. Again, I think it's a great price for 4K gaming. The mass consumership, it's too much for most people who are going to walk into a store. They're going to buy the Xbox One S, they're going to buy the PS4. They're going to pick one of those baseline ones, especially when you get into Christmas time and they realize I can either put one box under the tree or I can put a box and then a bunch of games and a controller under the tree. It's just the way it goes. It's just most people, when they get to Christmas time, they are trying to buy for a lot of people, so you start cutting corners in some places. They'll cut corners on the X or the Pro. That's the way it is. That's it for now, guys. I will see you next time.